Hi. Okay, so I'll get into a little bit of what is the policy talk, rhetoric, and who are the policy actors at play. I just love the name pineapple, so again, I'm going to just talk about pineapple and her parents, how they're able to see the other side of their situation. They're just not quite sure how to get there. The national policymakers, and this book was written in 2005. I would love to see what he thinks of Betsy DeVos and where we are now with No Child Left Behind. There's so many players in this, and I'm going to just touch on a couple of them. City planners, so and how they design neighborhoods, and what funding goes where, and how that affects promoting segregation. And then I put Nexus, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Nexus, but Nexus was a Nexus Academy was a charter school. And I'm going to use that as an example of how the policymakers and the stakeholders who design this charter school and their disconnect with the day-to-day on boots on the ground, for lack of a better term, players. So they created this policy in this school, and it was so disconnected to who their students were, the teachers. Anyway, I'll get more into that later. Okay, so my historical understanding of this book, I know you gave these questions as kind of just a guideline, and I'm going to free myself up from the question because my mind just keeps going in so many different directions. But Kozol paints, the first 9 chapters or so, I think he does a great job in painting a very vivid picture of these children and the effects that the policies, these new neoliberal policies, the effects they had on these children. And the picture was quite vivid in what these students had to face on a day-to-day basis. And, the curriculum, and I just keep thinking about the kids that wanted to take college prep classes, but were forced to take hairdressing classes and sewing classes and all these other odd things. So chapters 10, 11, 12, I think gets a lot more. Oh, and you know what? I'm sorry. I should have deleted that chapter 11 there because I was starting on something and then I stopped. But chapters 10, 11, 12, those get a lot more to me into policy. Well, it touches on policy, which is much more of what this class is about, which of course Kozol did not write this book specifically for our class, but I think it's a, there's so much more that could have been tapped on in a lot of different ways. So looking at this book and looking at kind of what Kozol was talking about what works and what doesn't work. He talked about a lot about integration, and I said versus Plessy, because Plessy was the separate but equal policies or legislature that we had in the United States. And clearly he felt that did not work. And clearly I think over time it shows it does not work. He's saying that integration works better. He gave a number of examples about the success and the black, I can't remember, there was how many million? Oh, I had it written somewhere. How many black people that had been integrated in their success, and the graduation rate, I think, was 95%. I'm looking for that. But it was like 95% versus the children that stayed in the segregated schools, and how low the graduation rate was. And I think it was the Gautreaux remedy. I don't know, but in Chicago, which went from 1966 to 1998, and how successful that was. But how that program was very successful in getting Section 8 people in living in suburban neighborhoods and allowing them to live outside of the inner cities and the lower socioeconomic environments, and how successful that was. But once the quota was met, the program ended. And I've seen that over and over and over again, where there's programs and policies and money thrown at something, and yeah, it's great, and then they just kind of drop it at toward the end. Charter schools. Now, what he said that was more intensely segregated than public schools. And I bring up Columbus Prep Academy, which I believe still is in existence, and it is kind of held up as this shining example of charter schools. And I had a chance to go to that school and talk to several of the players there, counselor, principal. And the reason I put successful question mark, yes, it's successful, but here's the thing that I think Kozol does not bring up in his book is the fact that I believe that once a school is able to quote unquote choose, I think I may touch on this later, but once they were able to have kind of this waiting list, and now they are able to choose who stays in their school and who does not stay in their school, I think they become far more successful. So even charter schools now, charter schools can accept students, but if the students really cause problems, are failing in one way, shape, or form, they're not attending, their behavior is such, or their grades are such, they can send that student back to their public school. So in essence, charter schools can screen out their students. But typically what happens is charter schools are so desperate for money that they end up keeping students that they normally would not keep. So I get into a little bit, I think a little later, into national exhaustion. So let's see. Brown versus Board of Education. Oh, okay. So that was attempts at desegregation. Brown versus the Board of Education. Then we tried busing, and now currently we're doing school choice. And these are somewhat attempts into desegregating. But I think what happens with busing and with school choice is you're taking students and you're plopping them into an environment. And then there's this, he talks a tiny bit about social isolation, and he does say that once they're there and the kids get to know each other, they tend to do better. But I do believe that that has an impact on Black students that he only again touches on just a little bit. And then I go into national response. Okay, so national response. No Child Left Behind was enacted, but that did very little. It did not lessen the inequities in funding. Yeah, so we came up with the stuff, but No Child Left Behind, but there was not funding. There was a lack of support in how we get these children to pass these national standards. He does get into school choice. He talks about these niche academies, but a lot of these niche academies, white people wanted their children there. And so then it became, again, a way of desegregating. It's a form of desegregation. Then he talked about themed academies, and there are some militaristic academies. I know in Toledo there is the Maritime Academy, when they get into this military kind of mindset. But a lot of these themed academies, I know there's like a business school, there's I don't know, but anyway, they come up with these various things, and I think Kozol is right that they are much more designed for marketability than they actually are effective. I'm not even sure how much of that even trickles into the curriculum. And even if it does, is that successful? Because you have, so-and-so business academy, K-12 business academy. Does that really help students? Does that, I don't know. That's again, see, I can go into deep dives about each and every one of these things. And then he talked a little bit about colleges and universities and teacher prep, and are the colleges and universities preparing these teachers to face the inequities in these inner city schools and these lower socioeconomic schools? So, Again, I could really, really, really go on and on and on about so much of this. Okay, so these are just thoughts that I kind of put together myself. Some of it was from what I read in the book. Some of it was just some thoughts of my own and some of what I want to tie into the final project. So, Nexus and Mosaica. So Nexus Academy was created by, what's the school? I can't think of it. It's a national Connections Academy. That's it. Connections Academy is a nationwide charter entity that is an online school, which I bet they're booming right about now. They decided to create Nexus Academy. So Nexus Academy was this brainchild. It was a blended school. Brick and mortar and online school put together created this blended school. So these people got together. They're like, this is the greatest thought. We could create this. I mean, when I got hired like right at the beginning of that school, right? Like before anybody else was hired. Meaning there were no principals. There was no one. There was just me. But anyway, in theory, they were going to create this academy where it was going to be flexible, that it was going to be state of the art. All the kids would have laptops and, they would spend half a day in school, but expected to do a full day's amount of schoolwork. The brainchild came up with this. They sat down with these higher ups. I'm not sure any of them had an educational background. Had they been principals in brick and mortar schools? Had they had any experience? I'm not sure they did. They just thought this was a great idea. I walked in, when they sat down with me with the concept of the school, I thought it was great. Once I really got into that school, I realized so many things were not going to work. There were tried and true, elements to this school that had failed, but they thought they were going to go ahead and give it a try again without really any knowledge base of why it had failed and what they were going to do differently that was going to make it successful. So case in point, they were going to create the open classroom concept. Okay, the open classroom concept came about in the 70s. They built schools. They designed all of these schools around this open classroom concept, and it failed miserably. And they went back into these schools and built walls as best they could because they realized it doesn't work. Nexus comes along, and this school opened up, I believe, in 2012 with this open classroom concept. And I thought, how are you creating an open classroom concept when it failed miserably? Why? What were you going to do differently that was going to make open classroom concept any better? They put the school in a downtown Toledo, Ohio. And it wasn't until the school had been open about 4 or 5 months before anyone from the headquarters had even stepped foot in Toledo, Ohio. So no one had ever even come to Toledo, Ohio to determine whether or not that was a good place to put that school. Anyway, I'm going to go on long, and I don't mean to go too long, but basically, think about when you get into executive functioning, when you get into planning and all of that. You've got kids coming in who are going to come to school half day and work on their own half, the other half of the day. That requires a great deal of executive functioning skills these kids did not have. You put it downtown Toledo, you provide no transportation. Now these kids are expected to take a bus. Well, guess what? The closest bus stop to where that building was where all the drug addicts and the homeless people hang out. So let's think this through. Who's coming to that school? Anyway. It was just so much of non-planning. I could go on and on. I'm sorry. Mosaica, another charter school, that, as Kozol talks about, they put the posters on the walls and they had this planning of pedagogies and curriculum that they thought was going to be successful, but none of it took into the account the students that they had. And so the teachers were forced to follow this curriculum, even though it wasn't successful. And what I found in both schools, and this is why I put big moneymaker up here, is because these people came along and realized they could make a ton of money by opening up these charter schools. And all they would ever ask about was, how many bodies do you have? How many people do you have? How many students? How many students? Now, they didn't care or seem to notice that we may have 150 students in the class, in the building, but, you know, over, let's say 6 months, there's 150 students in the school. How many of them were the same 150 that started the school that were there by the end of the school? It was a huge revolving door. Neither one of them, none of the headquarter people cared. They just wanted the money there, the bodies there, so they could make the money. And as long as we kept kids coming in that building, that was all they cared about. So they were making 6-figure salaries. Teachers are making, you know, I think barely over the poverty level salaries. Yet there was such a huge disconnect. And like I said, with Nexus, they didn't even come to Toledo until the school had been open several months. And still never, if you open a brand new school, this brand new concept, why are you not talking to the teachers to find out what is going on with, you know, is it working? Do we need to shift, adjust, change? Not once did they do that. Not once. Again, I could go into whatever. So, I get into a little bit, I put Brad here. I might skip over this. It's just a guy who is promoting himself. He's a big time leader in Toledo Public Schools. And he and I had a very heated conversation about him living in an all white neighborhood and how if a black person would move into that neighborhood, you know, he was very concerned about his property value going on. And at the time, our mayor was black and our, chief of fire department, the head guy, fire chief was black. Yes. Fire chief was black. Mayor was black. And I said, now you're telling me if they moved into your neighborhood, you would be concerned about property value dropping? He said, yes. But yet he is our educational leader in Toledo Public Schools, but doesn't understand that he's perpetuating racism, segregation. And what policies is he making? Anyway, just quickly wrapping this up because I am getting really long and I don't mean to, and I apologize. There are studies that connect prefrontal cortex and lower socioeconomic, children. And I'm going to go into that a lot more with my final project. And I went into that integration versus school choice. I mean, and that was the choice was the piece where as long as you can kick kids out of a school, as long as you have that option, you're always going to have a successful school. Whereas when you're living within a neighborhood, and this is what I like to promote, that you live within a neighborhood, you go to the public school within that neighborhood. How do we make all schools better? That was long. I apologize. And I really could go deeper into this, but that's what I'm thinking right here, right now. Thanks.